Every 5th November in Britain, on Guy Fawkes Day, we remember the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, when Guy Fawkes and fellow Catholic conspirators attempt to blow up Parliament and assassinate James I of England. Everyone knows how Fawkes was caught in the act, imprisoned and tortured at the Tower of London, and that he and most of his fellow conspirators suffered a traitor's hideous death in Westminster. But who was the real Guy Fawkes, the man behind the mask? Guy Fawkes was born in York in 1570, the son of Edward, a church lawyer and prominent Protestant in the city, and Edith, whose family included secret Catholics. He had two brothers, John and Christopher. At that time, it was dangerous to be Catholic. Many plots and rebellions against Elizabeth I were led by Catholics, which led to severe reprisals. Priests who were caught leading secret services were tortured and executed. To all outward appearance, the Fawkes were a law-abiding Protestant family until Edward Fawkes died when Guy was 8 years old. His mother remarried, this time to a Catholic, Dionys Bainbridge. The young Guy was drawn strongly to his stepfather's religion, and although he knew of the dangers, he converted to Catholicism. At the age of 21, the passionate young man set off to Europe to fight for Catholic Spain against Protestant Dutch reformers in the 8 Years' War. Fawkes had grown into a good-looking man, tall and strong, with thick reddish-brown hair and beard and impressive mustache. His compatriots in Europe described him admiringly as a man of a great piety, of exemplary temperance, of mild and cheerful demeanor, an enemy of broils and disputes, a faithful friend, and remarkable for his punctual attendance upon religious observance. Guy Fawkes' future took a fateful turn when he met an Englishman, Thomas Winter, in Spain. Winter was scouting around for allies to join a group of Catholic conspirators based in England, led by his cousin Robert Catesby. Devout Fawkes was a perfect match, brave and skillful. The two men returned to England in 1604, where James I had acceded to the throne the previous year. With the new reign, Catholics across the country had hoped for the end of the religious persecution they suffered for so long. After all, the king's mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, had been a devout Catholic. However, they were soon disappointed. The Protestant James I was a tolerant king. The conspirators, with Guy Fawkes now among them, decided on a drastic measure. Catesby's plan was to blow up Parliament during its state opening on 5th of November, when James I, the Queen, and his heir would also be present and would be killed. The conspirators then hoped to crown the king's young daughter, Princess Elizabeth. Along with Fawkes and cousins Catesby and Winter, the plotters included Winter's brother Robert, their brother-in-law John Grant, Catesby's second cousin Francis Tresham, his servant Thomas Bates, Fawkes' childhood classmates Christopher and John Wright, their brother-in-law Thomas Percy, Edward Digby, Ambrose Rookwood, and Robert Case. No one in the group knew much about gunpowder apart from Fawkes, an explosive expert from his military days. Naturally, he was choosing to set the fuse in the cellars underneath the Houses of Parliament. Their plan nearly succeeded. It was only thanks to an anonymous letter to the authorities received on late October that the king and his family and his Protestant ministers were not all murdered. An extract reads, "They shall receive a terrible blow, his permanent, and yet they shall not see who hurts them." Royal guards searched the House of Lords at midnight, and in the early hours of 5th November, Fawkes was discovered in the cellar with a fuse, a small lamp, a box of matches, and 46 poorly hidden barrels of gunpowder. Guy Fawkes is said to have been carrying his iron lantern when he was arrested in the cellar underneath the Houses of Parliament on the night of 5th of November. The lantern was given to the University of Oxford by Robert Haywood, who had been a protector of an official responsible for ensuring the rules of university are observed. His brother, Peter Haywood, had accompanied Sir Thomas Knivett, keeper of Whitehall Palace, in his faithful search on the cellar, and is credited with talking to the lantern from Guy Fawkes during the initial struggle and preventing him from detonating the gunpowder. The lantern seems to have been passed to Robert sometime after assassination attempt in 1640 left Peter mortally wounded. Robert then passed the lantern to the University of Oxford in 1641. Fawkes was arrested and taken to the king. When asked, Fawkes replied, "I wish to blow the Scottish king and all of his Scottish lords back to Scotland." He also expressed his regret at having failed. Although insulted, James I couldn't help but praise the traitor's Roman resolution. Fawkes was brought to the Tower of London to be imprisoned and interrogated. Sir William Waud, lieutenant of the Tower, led much of the interrogation in the Great Hall of King's House, a 16th century timber-framed building that overlooks Tower Green. At the time, the monarch or Privy Council had to authorize any form of torture. James I himself wrote the royal warrant. If he will not otherwise confess, the gentle tortures are first to be used upon him, and then, step by step, you may employ the harsher, and to speed your good work. Even just the threat of torture was sometimes enough to break a prisoner's resolve. When the gentler tortures failed, it's highly likely that Fawkes was racked, probably in the White Tower dungeons. The rack was a horrible device designed to inflict excruciating pain, as the prisoner's limbs were pulled in opposite directions until the joints were dislocated or separated. Guy Fawkes' signature before and after his interrogation seems to show that he was indeed tortured. His right hand seems to have been badly damaged. While Fawkes was at the Tower, the other conspirators fled to the Midlands. They were caught by High Sheriff of Worcester in the morning of 8th November. Robert Catesby, the Wright brothers, the Thomas Percy, were shot dead, and the others were taken to the Tower of London. Fawkes and his surviving co-conspirators, Thomas Winter, Ambrose Rookwood, and Robert Case, were committed, tried, and sentenced to the act of treason. Their fate was grisly. On 31st January 1606, they were dragged behind a horse along the streets of London to Westminster Yard, where one by one they were hanged, drawn, and quartered. Fawkes, who was already the most famous of all the plotters, was the last to go up the gallows, according to a contemporary account. Last of all came the great devil of all, Guy Fawkes, alias Johnson, who should have put fire to the powder. His body being weak with the torture and sickness, he was scarce to go up, yet with much ado, by the help of the hangman, went high enough to break his neck by his fall. He made no speech, but with his crosses and idle ceremonies made his end upon the gallows, and the blow, to the great joy of the beholders, that the land was ended of so wicked a villainy. In 1608, Sir William Waud had a large marble memorial erected in an upper room of the King's House, known as the Council Chamber. Strange as it may seem, This memorial celebrates the success in foiling a nation disaster and to remind other prisoners of the terrible fate that awaited traitors it must have helped to loosen some tongues. The monument records the names of Gunpowder Plot conspirators alongside those of the Privy Councillors who conducted their interrogation. Underneath, there is a quote from the Old Testament in Hebrew and repeated in Latin below. It translates as, "He discovereth deep things out of darkness, and bringeth out to light the shadow of death." In January 1606, James I passed a Thanksgiving Act to celebrate the failure of the Gunpowder Plot and his deliverance from danger. Called the observance of 5th November Act 1605, it involved a special church service, bonfires and fireworks. It remained in force until 1859, although celebrations still take place today. Another tradition that still lives on is the ceremonial search before the state opening of Parliament, when the yeomen of the guard look for hidden explosives in the cellar of the Palace of Westminster. Although Guy Fawkes was not the mastermind behind the Gunpowder Plot, he certainly became its figurehead. Unfortunately for him, he was the one caught red-handed, the first of the plotters to be arrested and taken to the Tower of London, and the last who be executed. Over 400 years later, Guy Fawkes' image persists as a symbol of rebellion, with protesters across the globe wearing masks of his styled face.